maps stop where the black fog begins. For generations, sailors have whispered that the fog is a graveyard, a void that eats the light. But what if the darkness isn't a trap? What if it's a sanctuary? Tonight, we leave the noisy world behind and drift with a crew of outcasts who took the ultimate risk. Close your eyes and let the tide carry you as we sail into the sea of black fog to discover a peace that has been hidden for 1,000 years. The ocean breathes, a slow and rhythmic inhalation and exhalation that has continued since the dawn of the world. A pulse that beats in time with the turning of the earth and the pull of the moon. And on this particular night, the sea was a vast expanse of polished obsidian, dark and smooth, and rippled only by the gentlest of breezes that carried the scent of salt and distant, ancient ice. It is said among the sailors who frequent the taverns of the coastal towns that the water holds memory, that every wave preserves the echo of the ships that have sailed upon it and the storms that have churned it. And perhaps that is why the silence tonight felt so heavy, so laden with the weight of unspoken stories and secrets kept in the crushing dark of the deep. The harbor of Oak Haven lay quiet, the wooden piers creaking softly as the tide nudged the pilings, the water lapping against the stone walls with a sound like a wet, rhythmic whisper, a hush, hush, hush that invited the soul to settle and the mind to cease its endless racing. In the harbor, the ships bobbed gently, their masts swaying in slow, synchronized arcs against the backdrop of a sky scattered with stars, diamonds of cold light that seemed to watch the world with indifferent beauty. But there was one ship that was awake while the others slept. One vessel where the crew moved with soft, deliberate purpose, preparing for a journey that no other sailor dared to undertake. This was the Silent Horizon, a ship that had seen the turning of many seasons, her hull crafted from oak that had been singing in the wind long before it was shaped by the hands of men, her sails patched and repatched until they resembled a quilt of canvas, each stitch a testament to resilience and the refusal to yield to the gale. The captain of this vessel was a man named Elias, though titles mattered little in the face of what they were about to encounter. He was a man of quiet demeanor, with eyes the color of sea glass, and a face etched with the lines of one who has spent a lifetime squinting at the horizon, seeking something that lay just beyond the edge of sight. He stood at the helm, his hands resting lightly on the wheel, feeling the subtle vibrations of the ship beneath him, the living timber responding to the water, a connection that felt as intimate and natural as his own heartbeat. The crew that moved about the deck were not the raucous, shouting pirates of legend, fueled by rum and greed. They were a brotherhood and sisterhood of the weary, men and women who had tired of the noise of the land, of the endless bickering of kingdoms and the clattering of coins, and who had sought the sea because the sea demanded nothing but respect. They were seeking the truth of the sea of black fog. It was a legend, a myth, a bedtime story told to frighten children and warn reckless captains. A story that said once a year, on a night when the air grew unnaturally still, and the temperature dropped until the breath hung in the air like mist, a thick, impenetrable black fog would descend upon a specific stretch of the ocean, a fog so dense it swallowed light and sound, and any ship that entered it would vanish, never to be seen again, leaving no wreckage, no flotsam, no sign of struggle, simply erased from the surface of the world as if it had never existed. But Elias and his crew did not believe in monsters, nor did they believe in the void. They believed that the fog hid something rare and beautiful, a gateway perhaps, or a sanctuary. And so, on this night, the night the almanacs and the feeling in their bones told them the fog would come, they cast off the ropes that bound them to the safety of the shore. The sound of the heavy ropes hitting the water was a dull, wet thud, followed by the hiss of the lines being hauled in, the hemp fibers groaning as they were coiled neatly on the deck, wet with the harbor water. The silent horizon began to drift away from the pier, pushed by the outgoing tide and the gentle encouragement of the wind that filled the jib with a soft snap, a sound like a sheet being shaken out in a quiet room. Elias turned the wheel, guiding the bow toward the open sea, leaving the lights of Oakhaven behind, the warm yellow glows of windows and lanterns shrinking until they were nothing more than fireflies in the distance, and then, eventually, nothing at all. They were alone now, suspended between the dark water below and the dark sky above. The only sound the rhythmic cleaving of the water by the prow of the ship, a steady shhh that was hypnotic in its repetition. The air grew cooler as they moved further from the land, the warmth of the earth replaced by the chill of the open ocean, a crisp, clean cold that woke the senses and made the blood flow a little faster. The crew settled into their stations, not working so much as keeping a vigil. There was Silas, the old lookout, wrapped in a thick wool coat, leaning against the railing and whittling a piece of driftwood, the shavings curling away from his knife to fall into the sea. There was Mara, the navigator, checking her compass by the light of a hooded lantern, though she knew that where they were going, the compass would soon be useless. There was Cale, a young man who had fled a life of nobility for the freedom of the waves, sitting cross-legged on the deck, watching the stars with a look of profound peace on his face. They did not speak, for there was no need for words. They were united by a shared purpose and a shared silence, a collective holding of breath as they sailed toward the unknown. The ocean tonight was particularly still, the swells long and low, rolling under the keel with a gentle, lulling motion that rocked the ship like a cradle, back and forth, back and forth. soothing the timber and the souls of those on board. It was a perfect night for sailing, the kind of night where the boundary between the ship and the sea seems to blur, where the vessel becomes just another wave, another natural part of the environment. Hours passed in this tranquil drift, the moon climbing higher in the sky, painting a path of silver light across the water that looked solid enough to walk upon, a glittering road leading to the edge of the world. Elias watched that silver road, his eyes half closed, his mind drifting like the ship. He thought about the fear that others held for the black fog, the terror of the unknown, and he wondered why humanity was so afraid of what it could not see. To him, the darkness was not a threat but a canvas, a space where the imagination could run free, where the strict rules of reality could be bent or broken. He sought the fog not to conquer it, but to submit to it, to let it wash over him and show him what lay on the other side of certainty. It was deep into the night, in the hour when the world is quietest, known as the wolf hour or the witching hour, when the change began. It was subtle at first, a slight dimming of the stars, as if a thin veil had been drawn across the heavens. The silver path of the moon on the water began to tarnish, the brilliance fading to a dull gray, and the air grew heavy, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on their arms stand up. The sound of the ocean changed, too. The crisp lapping of the waves became a muffled, sluggish sound, as if the water itself were thickening, turning into oil or mercury. Elias straightened at the wheel, his hands tightening slightly on the spokes. "It is coming," he said, his voice low, hardly more than a murmur. But in the silence, it carried to every corner of the deck. The crew looked up, their eyes scanning the horizon, and there they saw it. Ahead of them, stretching from east to west, a wall of absolute darkness was rising from the sea, blotting out the sky, the stars, the horizon line. It was not like a storm cloud, which has texture and variation. This was a void, a sheer cliff of nothingness that seemed to absorb the light around it. It was the sea of black fog. The ship sailed on, carried by its momentum and the current, moving inexorably toward the wall of night. As they approached, the temperature dropped sharply, not to a freezing cold, but to a damp, penetrating chill that smelled of old stone and deep, sunless caverns. The wind died completely, the sails going slack, hanging limp from the yards. Yet the ship continued to move, pulled by a mysterious tide that flowed only toward the fog. The transition from the clear night to the fog was not violent. There was no turbulence, no sudden gust of wind. It was a gentle crossing, a sliding from one world into another. One moment, the bow of the silent horizon was bathed in the faint starlight. The next, it was swallowed by the blackness, vanishing from sight as if it had been cut away. Then the foremast disappeared, then the mainmast, and finally the stern where Elias stood was enveloped. and the world of light and stars was gone. They were inside. The darkness was absolute. It was so thick it felt tangible, like velvet brushing against the skin, soft and heavy. Elias held his hand up in front of his face and could not see it, not even an outline. It was a sensory deprivation that should have been terrifying, but instead it was strangely calming. With the loss of sight, the other senses heightened to compensate. The sound of the crew's breathing became distinct. The rhythmic inhalation and exhalation of a dozen people echoing softly in the mist. The creaking of the ship's timbers became a symphony, the wood groaning and settling as the hull adjusted to the strange waters. The smell of the fog was complex, a mixture of ozone, salt, and something sweet, like night-blooming jasmine or ancient, dusty paper. "Steady," Elias whispered, and his voice seemed to hang in the air, not dissipating but lingering, amplified by the fog. We drift now. There was no way to steer, no point of reference to navigate by. The compass needle was spinning lazily, unmoored from the magnetic north, dancing to a different, slower rhythm. Mara stepped away from the binnacle, closing the cover of the compass. "North is gone," she said softly. "South is gone. We are just here." And here was a place of profound peace. The water beneath them was silent now, the ship gliding through it with zero resistance, as if they were floating on air. The darkness was not empty. It felt full, pregnant with presence. As their eyes adjusted, or perhaps as their minds adjusted, the darkness began to change. It was not that it became lighter, but that they began to see without light. Faint, ghostly shapes began to materialize in the fog, swirling patterns of gray and charcoal that danced and shifted like smoke. The crew, standing on the deck, found that they could see each other, not as solid forms, but as silhouettes of soft luminescence, their outlines glowing with a faint, pale energy. It was the bioluminescence of the soul, perhaps, or a trick of the fog, but it was beautiful. They looked like spirits sailing a ghost ship, drifting through the ether. Silas sat back down on his crate, his knife still in his hand, though he had stopped whittling. "It's quiet," he rumbled, his voice sounding like stones rolling in a riverbed. "I can hear my own heart beating." "It is the only clock we have left," Elias replied, leaving the wheel to walk down to the main deck. He moved slowly, floating through the gloom. The fog has stolen time, and it felt true. In the outside world, time is measured by the movement of the sun, the ticking of clocks, the schedules of trade and industry. Here, in the black fog, there was only the eternal now. A minute could be an hour could be a day. There was no urgency, no deadline, no place they needed to be. The anxiety that usually hummed in the background of their lives, the worry about the future, the regret about the past, simply evaporated, absorbed by the mist. Cale lay back on the deck, staring up into the void where the sky used to be. "I feel heavy," he murmured, good heavy, like when you're just about to fall asleep and your body turns to lead. Surrender to it, Mara said, sitting beside him. The fog wants us to rest. The ship continued its slow, mesmerized journey. Occasionally, the fog would part slightly, revealing glimpses of things that defied explanation, but inspired wonder. Once, they drifted past a towering spire of rock that rose from the water and disappeared into the mist above, its surface covered in glowing moss that pulsed with a slow blue light. Another time, they saw a school of fish, or what looked like fish, swimming through the air alongside the ship, their bodies made of translucent crystal, trailing ribbons of light behind them. They made no sound, just glided through the fog, circling the masts before diving back into the obsidian water. These sights did not provoke fear. They were viewed with a dreamlike acceptance. In a dream, one does not question the flying fish or the glowing rock. One simply observes. The silent horizon was sailing through a collective dream, a shared hallucination brought to life by the unique physics of the fog. Elias walked to the prow of the ship and looked down. The water was a mirror of the fog, black and deep. He felt a pull, a desire to merge with it, but he stayed rooted to the wood of his ship. He realized then that the ships that never returned had not sunk. They had simply stayed. Why would anyone leave this? Why go back to a world of pain and noise when one could drift forever in this velvet sanctuary? He imagined the other crews, the ones who had come before, drifting somewhere nearby, their ships slowly turning in the current, the sailors sleeping on the decks, preserved by the mist, dreaming their way through eternity. It was not death. It was a pause, a long, beautiful pause. As the hours stretched on, the crew began to succumb to the drowsiness that saturated the air. One by one, they found comfortable spots on the deck. The wood, usually hard and unforgiving, seemed to yield under them, softening to accommodate their weary bodies. The fog wrapped around them like blankets, keeping them warm. Kale was the first to sleep, his breathing deepening into a slow rhythm. Then Silas, his head bowing to his chest, his hands resting loosely on his knees. Mara curled up near the mainmast, her cheek resting on a coil of rope, a faint smile on her lips. Elias remained awake the longest, feeling the responsibility of the watch, but even he could not resist the gentle pressure of the fog. It pressed against his eyelids, heavy and sweet. It whispered in his ears, a sound like the brushing of pine boughs in the wind. Rest, Elias, rest. The ocean holds you. He sat down near the wheel, leaning his back against the structure. He looked out at his ship, at the glowing outlines of his friends, at the swirling, living darkness. He felt a profound sense of gratitude. They had taken the risk to find the truth, and the truth was peace. The truth was that the monsters were only in their minds, and here, in the fog, the mind was quiet. Ship drifted on. There was no destination. The journey itself was the destination. The hull cut through the water with a sound like tearing silk. The mist swirled, forming shapes of castles and forests and faces that appeared and vanished in the blink of an eye. Deep in the water, large, slow things moved. Their presence felt as a displacement of the current, gentle giants of the deep that meant no harm. The silent horizon became part of the ecosystem of the fog, a wooden seed floating in the cosmic dark. And so, the narrative of the night continued without interruption, a smooth, unbroken stream of moments. The silence was not empty, but full of texture. There was the sound of the condensation dripping from the rigging, drip, 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 a metronome for their slumber. There was the faint creak of the rudder shifting with the current. There was the sound of the ocean breathing, a slow rise and fall that rocked them gently. Elias finally closed his eyes, and the moment he did, the distinction between the ship and the sea, between his body and the fog, dissolved completely. He was floating. He was the ship. He was the fog. He was the memory of the ocean. He dreamed of ancient days, of the time before land, when the world was only water and silence. He dreamed of the stars when they were young, and in his dream, he saw the other ships, the lost fleet, drifting in a great, slow circle around a central point of calm, a vortex of peace. They were all there. The Mary Celeste, the Flying Dutchman, the nameless vessels of antiquity. They were not rot and ruin, they were pristine, preserved by the magic of the black fog, their crews suspended in the amber of the moment. The fog seemed to have a consciousness of its own, a benevolent intelligence that sought to soothe. It filtered out the harshness of existence. It muffled the sharp edges of memory, leaving only the soft, nostalgic glow of the past. It was a place of healing. For the pirates, who had spent their lives running, fighting, and searching, this was the ultimate treasure. Not gold or jewels, but the cessation of struggle. The freedom to simply be. As the ship drifted deeper, the fog became even thicker, if that were possible, turning into a substance almost like liquid shadow. It supported the ship, cradling it. The water below seemed to glow with a faint, violet light, illuminating the fog from beneath, casting long, dancing shadows across the deck. It was a display of light and shadow worthy of a cathedral, solemn and holy. Time had no meaning here. Had it been a night, a week, a year, it didn't matter. The beard on Silas's face did not grow. The hunger in their bellies did not rise. They were sustained by the atmosphere. The ship moved through a patch of the fog where the air hummed with a low, resonant vibration, a sound that was felt in the bones more than heard with the ears. It was a healing frequency, vibrating the tension out of their muscles, aligning their heartbeats to the slow pulse of the planet. Elias, in his half-sleep, felt a tear slide from his eye, not of sadness, but of sheer relief. The weight he had carried for so long, the weight of command, of survival, was lifted. He was just a soul on a ship in the dark. The silent horizon slowly began to turn, caught in a gentle eddy. It rotated with agonizing slowness, a ballet of timber and water. The movement changed the view, though the view was always the same swirling black. But the rotation felt like a caress, a rocking motion that deepened the trance of the crew. They were children of the tide now. The fog whispered stories to them as they slept. It told them of the whales that sang in the deep, songs that traveled for thousands of miles. It told them of the coral that grew in the dark, building castles of calcium one atom at a time. It told them of the rain that fell on the ocean, mixing fresh water with salt, a marriage of the sky and the sea. In this timeless state, the concept of returning became absurd. Return to what? To the noise, to the light that blinded, to the gravity that weighed them down. No, the truth they had found was that the fog was a trap, yes, but a trap of paradise. It caught you with peace. It imprisoned you with comfort. And no one who tasted it ever wanted to leave. The legend was true. Ships never returned. But the tragedy was a misunderstanding. It was not a tragedy of loss. It was a comedy of escape. They had escaped the world. The ship drifted past a massive, floating log, a remnant of some ancient forest, now bleached white and bobbing in the black water. On the log, a single bird sat, a small, dark shape that did not fly away as the ship passed. It watched them with bright, intelligent eyes, a guardian of the mist. It let out a small chirp, a sound that was shockingly loud in the silence, a single note of life in the symphony of the void. Then the ship moved on, and the bird vanished into the fog behind them. Elias shifted in his sleep, his hand twitching as he dreamt of holding the wheel. But in his dream, the wheel was made of light, and the ship was sailing through the stars. The fog had merged the ocean and the sky into one seamless continuum. The reality of the wood under his back was the only anchor to the physical world, and even that felt tenuous. The ship groaned, a long, low sound of settling timber. It sounded like a content sigh. The vessel itself was resting. After years of battering waves and scouring winds, the silent horizon had found a place where the water was gentle and the air was still. The ship was healing, too. The salt crystals in the wood dissolved in the damp air, the fibers relaxing. Far away, or perhaps very close, a sound echoed through the fog. It was the tolling of a bell, a deep bronze note that reverberated through the mist, solemn and slow. Dong, dong, dong. It was not an alarm. It was a heartbeat. It was the sound of the center of the sea of black fog. The crew did not wake, but the sound wove itself into their dreams, adding a layer of profundity to their slumber. They dreamed of underwater temples where bells rang with the movement of the currents. They dreamed of a great heart beating in the center of the world. The ship adjusted its course slightly, as if drawn to the sound. It drifted toward the source of the tolling. The darkness seemed to shimmer with the vibrations of the bell. Ripples of sound moved through the fog like ripples in a pond. The silent horizon rode these sound waves, rising and falling imperceptibly. The atmosphere grew even more dense, more sacred. They were approaching the sanctum. The truth of the pirate's quest was not a treasure chest or a sea monster. It was this sanctum of silence, a place where the universe paused to catch its breath. Elias' breathing was slow and deep, matched by Mara's, matched by Silas's, matched by Kale's. They were a single organism now, the crew and the ship, breathing together. The fog was their lungs. The sea was their blood. The darkness was their skin. They had transcended the limitations of individuality. As they drifted, the fog began to show them images of their past, projected on the screen of the mist. Elias saw his childhood home, the smoke rising from the chimney, the dog sleeping on the porch. He saw it with perfect clarity, and he felt the warmth of the fire. Mara saw the library where she had learned to read the stars, the smell of old parchment filling her nose. Silas saw the face of his wife, long gone, smiling at him from the darkness, young and beautiful again. The fog gave them back what time had stolen. It was a benevolent thief, returning the stolen goods of memory. The ship sailed through a patch of air that smelled of rain, a fresh, clean scent that washed away the stale salt of the journey. It felt like a baptism. They were being cleansed of the grit of the world. The water alongside the hull sparkled with increased intensity, the bioluminescence swirling into spiral galaxies that mirrored the Milky Way. The boundary between up and down was completely gone. They were floating in the center of a sphere of stars. The bell tolled again, softer now, or perhaps they were moving away from it, or perhaps the sound was moving inside them. Dong, dong, it was the lullaby of the abyss. The ship slowed, its momentum finally fading until it came to a near complete stop. It hovered in the water, turning very, very slowly. They had reached the doldrums of the fog, the place of absolute stillness. Here, the silence was so profound it had a texture, a weight. It felt like being wrapped in a heavy, warm quilt. The world outside the world of politics, of hunger, of aging, felt like a distant nightmare from which they had finally awoken. This, here, was reality. This peace, this dark. And so, the pirates of the silent horizon found their truth. They found that the sea of black fog was not a place of death, but a place of eternal life, suspended in the amber of the moment. They found that to be lost is to be found. They slept on, drifting in the gentle embrace of the dark, while the ship held them safe above the star-filled depths. The fog swirled around them, a protective cloak that would never lift, hiding them from the eyes of the world, keeping their secret safe forever. The ocean breathed in and out, a rhythm that would never end, rocking them, holding them, loving them, in the heart of the beautiful, endless, peaceful night. The stillness was absolute, yet it was not static. It was a dynamic stillness, like a spinning top that moves so fast it appears motionless. The ship sat in the water, a dark shape in a darker world, and the crew lay scattered about the deck like fallen leaves, resting in positions of total relaxation. The condensation from the fog gathered on their clothes, on their hair, on the wood of the deck, forming tiny jewels of water that reflected the faint, ambient light of the deep. Occasionally, a drop would fall from a spar, landing on the deck with a soft tap, a sound that rippled through the silence like a pebble dropped in a still pool. It was the only punctuation in the long sentence of the night. Elias dreamed on. In his dream, he was speaking to the fog. The fog had a voice, a chorus of whispers that sounded like the wind in the rigging. "Stay," it said, "drift. There is nothing for you out there." And Elias agreed. He had no desire to wake, no desire to lift his head and check the compass. The compass was irrelevant. Directions were for people who had somewhere to go. He was already there. He was home. The hull of the silent horizon absorbed the vibrations of the water. The sea here was dense, perhaps saltier, or perhaps filled with minerals from the deep vents. It held the ship higher in the water, cradling it more firmly. The rocking was microscopic, a gentle sway that massaged the senses. It was the movement of a mother rocking a child, instinctual and soothing. Around the ship, the fog began to weave intricate patterns. Threads of darker mist intertwined with lighter gray wisps, creating Celtic knots and mandalas that slowly rotated in the air. These shapes were mesmerizing, drawing the eye into their centers, leading the mind into a trance. If any of the crew had been awake to see them, they would have been entranced, but they saw them in their minds, the patterns bleeding into their dreams, giving structure to their rest. A gentle current began to nudge the ship again, pushing it slowly, ever so slowly, to the east, to the west. It was impossible to say, but the movement felt purposeful. The fog was guiding them, perhaps to join the other ships, to take their place in the armada of the sleepers. The silent horizon complied, yielding to the pressure of the water. It was a ship of peace now, a vessel of slumber. The cannons, covered in tarps, were cold and silent. The swords in the armory were dulling in their scabbards. The violence of their past lives was rusting away, replaced by the patina of peace. The temperature remained constant, a cool, preserving chill that kept the air fresh. It was perfect sleeping weather, the kind of cool that makes you pull your coat tighter and burrow deeper into warmth. Silas, in his sleep, pulled his collar up, a content sigh escaping his lips. He was dreaming of his boyhood farm, of the smell of hay and horses. The fog had given him back his youth. The darkness was a presence, a companion. It was not lonely in the fog. The fog was the company. It filled the spaces between the sailors, connecting them. It filled the space between the masts. It filled the lungs with every breath, bringing the calm of the outside into the inside. They were inhaling peace, exhaling stress. Inhale peace, exhale stress. The cycle continued, minute after minute, hour after hour. Deep below the keel, a large shape glided past, a whale of the deep, ancient and blind. It sensed the ship above, the wood and the heartbeats, and it sent up a pulse of sound, a greeting. The sound traveled through the water, through the hull, and into the bodies of the sleepers. They felt it as a warm vibration in their chests, a reassurance from the natural world. "You are welcome here," the whale seemed to say. "We are all children of the dark." The ship drifted on, carried by the unseen river within the ocean. The fog parted slightly ahead, revealing a faint, golden glow in the distance. It was not the sun, nor a lighthouse. It was a concentration of the bioluminescence, a gathering of light. The ship drifted toward it. As they got closer, the light resolved into thousands of floating jellyfish, small orbs of golden light pulsing gently in the water and in the air, for here the boundary was thin. They floated around the ship, tiny lanterns to light the way. The light was soft, amber, and warm, bathing the deck in a candlelight glow. It made the scene look like a painting by an old master, full of shadow and gold. The crew slept on, bathed in the golden light, their faces peaceful, their dreams turning to gold. Elias turned in his sleep, his hand brushing the deck. He felt the vibration of the golden light, a hum of pure energy. It was recharging him, knitting together the frayed edges of his soul. He was being remade. The pirate captain was dying, and the dreamer was being born. The silent horizon sailed through the field of golden lights, parting the swarm gently. The jellyfish bumped against the hull, bouncing off softly, unharmed. They trailed long, delicate tentacles that brushed the wood like fingers. Then, as slowly as they had entered, they drifted out of the light and back into the soothing gray-black of the deep fog. The golden glow faded behind them, a memory of warmth, but the warmth remained in their bones. The darkness reclaimed them, but it was a friendly darkness. The ship settled into a new rhythm, a slightly faster drift, as if it had been caught by a stream. The sound of the water against the hull increased slightly, a hiss, hiss, hiss that sounded like hush, hush, hush. The ocean was shushing them, telling them to sleep deeper, to let go of the last remnants of wakefulness. And they did. They let go. Kale's hand relaxed, and his fingers uncurled. Mara's breathing slowed even more. Silas's head tipped further back. Elias' brow smoothed completely. were gone, lost in the best possible way, lost to the world, found to themselves. The sea of black fog held them, a secret kept between the water and the sky. The narrative of the night stretched out, a long, unspooling thread of time. There were no chapters here, no breaks for commercials, no pauses for breath, just the endless, fluid continuity of existence. The ship was a planet in a universe of fog, spinning slowly, traveling its orbit of peace. The wood, the rope, the canvas, the flesh, the bone, the water, the mist. It was all one substance, all one dream. And if one were to listen very closely, one could hear the sound of the universe sleeping. It sounded like the ocean. It sounded like the wind. It sounded like the slow, steady beating of a heart in the dark. The silent horizon drifted on, and on, and on, into the infinite, comforting velvet black. There was no sudden shift to mark the passage of time, no jarring bell to announce the changing of the watch, only the continuous, velvety slide of the silent horizon through the sea of black fog. A motion so smooth it felt less like sailing, and more like the rotation of a planet, inevitable and serene. The ship had become a world unto itself, a small wooden island of slumber floating in a universe of mist, and the crew were its sleeping inhabitants, their chests rising and falling in a rhythm that matched the slow, unseen swells of the dark ocean beneath them. The fog, which had initially seemed like a barrier, now revealed itself to be a blanket, a thick, protective layer that insulated them from the harsh glare of the sun and the biting winds of the world they had left behind. And in this insulation, they found a comfort they had never known existed. Elias, still seated near the helm, was no longer steering, for the ship knew where to go, guided by the silent magnetism of the deep. And in his dreams, he was not a captain burdened with the lives of his crew, but a bird soaring through a night sky that never ended, his wings catching the updrafts of the void. The fog continued to weave its spell, thickening around the masts, dampening the sound of the water, until it was nothing more than a faint, rhythmic hush, like the sound of blood rushing through one's own ears when the world is very quiet. As they drifted deeper into the heart of the anomaly, the texture of the air began to change, becoming richer, heavier, filled with the scent of ozone and ancient rain, a smell that triggered memories of comfort and safety in the minds of the sleepers. Mara, curled by the rope coil, dreamt of a library where the books were made of clouds and the words were written in starlight. And as she read them, she understood the secrets of the tides and the language of the whales. The ship moved past a shape in the darkness, a looming shadow that slowly resolved into the form of another vessel, a great galleon with high, ornate sides and masts, that reached up into the invisible sky. It was the Gilded Queen, a ship lost a century ago. Her paint faded, but her timbers sound, floating perfectly still in the obsidian water. As the silent horizon drifted alongside her, the gap between the two ships bridged by the swirling mist, there was no sign of rot or decay, only preservation. On the deck of the Gilded Queen, figures could be seen, not as skeletons or ghosts, but as sleeping sailors, slumped against the railings or lying on the hatch covers, preserved in the same timeless slumber that had claimed Elias and his crew. They looked peaceful, their faces smoothed of lines and worry, their clothes damp with the dew of the fog, suspended in the moment of their greatest relief. It was not a graveyard. It was a dormitory of the deep, a place where the weary came to rest, and never left because the rest was too sweet to abandon. The sight of the other ship did not alarm the silent horizon, nor did it wake the crew. Instead, it deepened the sense of community, the feeling that they had joined a silent brotherhood of the lost. They passed the Gilded Queen slowly, the wake of their passing gently rocking the older ship, a cradle motion that seemed to settle the sleeping sailors even deeper into their dreams. The fog swirled between them, connecting the vessels with tendrils of gray vapor, a physical manifestation of the shared peace. Then the Gilded Queen faded back into the darkness behind them, swallowed by the benevolent night, and the silent horizon was alone again, though the feeling of solitude had been replaced by a sense of belonging. The ocean floor, miles beneath them, began to rise, not to meet the surface, but to form submerged mountains and valleys that influenced the currents above. The water here was different, denser, saturated with the magic of the fog, supporting the ship with a firmness that made the keel hum with a low, resonant frequency. This vibration traveled up through the ribs of the ship and into the bodies of the crew, a massage for the soul that loosened the last knots of tension from their muscles. Cale, dreaming of a meadow of blue flowers, sighed in his sleep, his hand twitching as if brushing the petals. Silas, dreaming of a forge where the fire was warm, but never burned, grunted softly, a sound of pure contentment. The darkness was not uniform. It had depth and variation, layers of shadow that moved and shifted like curtains in a breeze. Occasionally, a soft, phosphorescent light would bloom in the distance, a pale green or a muted violet, expanding like a drop of ink in water before fading away. A silent firework display for the dreamers. These lights were the emanations of the deep-sea life that had risen to meet the fog, creatures of jelly and light that floated in the boundary between air and water, blurring the line further. A jellyfish the size of a carriage, trailing tentacles like lace curtains, drifted over the deck of the silent horizon, hovering silently above the sleeping Elias. Its bell pulsed with a slow, hypnotic rhythm, casting a soft, aqua light over the captain's face. It watched him with a primitive, ancient awareness, recognizing a fellow traveler in the dark. And then, with a gentle contraction of its body, it propelled itself upward, vanishing into the mist above the masts. The encounter was peaceful, a meeting of two worlds that usually never touch, mediated by the neutrality of the fog. The ship began to turn again, following a long, lazy curve in the current. They were entering the spirals, a region of the sea of black fog, where the currents moved in concentric circles, slowing down as they approached the center. The movement was imperceptible to the senses, but the soul felt it, a winding down, a deceleration of existence. The linear march of time, which drives men to hurry and worry, was here bent into a circle, repeating the same moment of comfort over and over again. The crew was no longer aging. The cells in their bodies had halted their replication, caught in the stasis of the mist. They were immortal now, in a way, preserved in the amber of the night. The fog had permeated the wood of the ship, turning the oak into something harder than stone, yet lighter than cork, a material that would never rot, never waterlog. The sails, furled and forgotten, had become like stone drapery, frozen in beautiful folds. As the narrative of the night flowed on, the silent horizon drifted past more ships. There was a Viking longship, its dragon prow staring blindly into the dark, its warriors sleeping in rows with their shields as pillows. There was a steamer from a later age, its smokestack cold and silent, the coal in its bunkers unburned. The crew slumped over tables in the mess hall, cards still in their hands, faces serene. There was a small fishing boat, with a single old man sleeping in the stern, a net of silver fish hanging over the side, the fish too sleeping, suspended in the water, neither living nor dying. It was a museum of maritime history, curated by the fog, a collection of those who had sought the horizon and found the end of the world. And the end of the world was soft. It was quiet. It was a place where nothing ever happened, and that was the greatest gift of all. The pirates of the silent horizon were now fully integrated into this tableau. Their breathing had synchronized with the pulse of the fog, a long, slow inhale that drew the darkness in, and a long, slow exhale that released the self into the void. Elias' dreams shifted. He was no longer a bird. He was the fog itself. He felt the hull of his ship within him. He felt the water below him. He felt the distant stars that he could no longer see. He understood now that the truth they had come to find was not a treasure to be carried back, but a state of being to be inhabited. The risk they had taken had paid off in a currency they hadn't expected, the currency of eternity. Why would they ever want to return to the loud, bright, painful world of the living? To return would be the nightmare. To wake up would be to die. The sound of the bell returned the deep dong, dong that they had heard earlier, but now it was louder, encompassing them. It wasn't coming from a buoy or a church. It was the resonance of the water itself, a standing wave of sound that held the ships in its grip. The silent horizon vibrated in sympathy with the tone. It was a lullaby sung by the planet's core. The vibration moved through the deck, through the clothes of the crew, and into their bones, humming a song of sleep, sleep, sleep. The journey is over. The anchor is dropped. And indeed, though no anchor had been thrown, the ship felt anchored. It had arrived at the center of the spiral, the eye of the storm that was not a storm. Here, the movement ceased almost entirely. The ship rotated once every 100 years, perhaps. The water was perfectly flat, a black mirror that reflected nothing, because there was nothing to reflect but the dark. In this center, the fog was so thick it was like a solid substance. One could almost carve it. It pressed against the skin with a gentle weight, like a heavy blanket. The temperature was perfectly neutral, neither hot nor cold, exactly the temperature of the blood. The boundary between the body and the air vanished. Where did Cale end and the fog begin? It was impossible to say. He was dissolving into the peace. His dreams were no longer of meadows, but of abstract colors and feelings, a wash of blue comfort, a wave of gray safety. The narrative paused to linger on the face of Silas. The old lookout, who had spent his life straining his eyes against the sun and the salt spray, had finally relaxed the muscles around his eyes. The deep furrows in his brow had smoothed out. He looked like a child again. The knife he had been whittling with had slipped from his hand hours ago, or years ago, and lay on the deck, gleaming dully in the bioluminescent light. It would lie there forever. No rust would claim it. No hand would lift it. It was an artifact of a finished task. The work was done. All work was done. A gentle rain began to fall, but it was not a cold, driving rain. It was a warm mist, a condensation of the fog that settled on everything like a benediction. It slicked the deck and ran in tiny rivulets down the scuppers, making a sound like whispering voices. Hush, hush, hush. The ship accepted the rain. The water washed away the dust of the land, the pollen of flowers they would never see again, the soot of harbor fires. It cleansed them, preparing them for their eternal vigil. Elias, in the depths of his trance, felt a presence near him. It was not a physical presence, but a consciousness. It was the collective mind of the lost fleet. The captains of the Gilded Queen, the Viking chieftain, the old fisherman, they were all there in the ether, greeting him. "Welcome, brother," they whispered in the language of dreams. "Welcome to the harbor that never closes. Welcome to the sea of black fog." Elias felt a surge of gratitude. He was not alone. He had never been less alone. He joined his mind to theirs, adding his memories, his stories, his piece to the collective. The fog grew denser with his addition. The silent horizon settled lower in the water, finding its perfect buoyancy. The hull creaked once, a final sound of adjustment, and then fell silent. The silence that followed was heavy, profound, and absolute. It was a silence that had weight. It filled the ears and the mind, pushing out any remaining thoughts of the past or future. There was only the now, the eternal, stretching, infinite now. And so, the legend of the sea of black fog grew. In the world outside, in the taverns of Oak Haven and beyond, sailors would continue to tell the story of the pirate ship that went to find the truth and never returned. They would speculate about sea monsters and whirlpools and curses. They would shudder at the thought of the dark. But they would be wrong. They would not know that the pirates had succeeded. They would not know that the silent horizon was floating in a paradise of shadow, that the crew was wrapped in the most comforting sleep imaginable, that they were safe, loved by the ocean, and free from the tyranny of time. The fog swirled, creating a tunnel of vision for a brief second, looking up toward where the sky should be. There were no stars, but there was a faint, diffuse glow, like the light of a distant moon seen through deep water. It was the only light they needed. It was the nightlight for the nursery of the deep. Then the tunnel collapsed, the fog rushing back in to fill the void, tucking them in once more. The ship drifted on, imperceptibly slow, turning in the cosmic carousel of the mist. The birds of the open ocean avoided this place, sensing the unnatural stillness. But occasionally, a black albatross, old and weary, would glide into the fog, seeking its own rest. It would find a perch on the yardarm of a lost galleon or the railing of the silent horizon, tuck its head under its wing, and join the slumber. The fleet grew, one soul at a time. The breathing of the crew was a collective rhythm now, a slow, oceanic respiration. In, the fog expands; out, the fog contracts. They were the engine of the stillness. As long as they slept, the fog would remain. As long as the fog remained, they would sleep. It was a perfect, closed loop of existence. And in the very center of the center, where the bell tolled no more because its vibration was everywhere, the water began to glow with a deep indigo light. It rose from the depths, bathing the hull of the silent horizon in purple radiance. This was the heart of the ocean, the source of the fog. It was not evil. It was not hungry. It was simply a force of absolute calm, a counterweight to the chaos of the fiery world above. It held the ship in a grip of light. Elias' hand, resting on the deck, was illuminated by the indigo glow. He looked like a statue of a saint, beatified by the sea. His quest was over. The risk was taken. The truth was found. And the truth was a lullaby that never ended. The darkness wrapped around them, layer upon layer, soft as silk, strong as steel. The world of men was a distant, fading memory, a story told in a different language. Here, there was only the language of the tide, the dialect of the mist, the grammar of silence. On and on they drifted, into the black, into the peace, into the forever. The sea of black fog held them close and would never, ever let them go.